Bienvenue à la 21.
Welcome to meeting number 29th of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights.
In the hybrid format. Pursuant to House Order of June 23rd, 2022, members are attending in person in the room and remotely by Zoom. Just a few comments before we start. For witnesses and members, please wait until I recognize you by name before taking the floor. The comments are through the chair. For those of you by video link, you have a little globe icon on the bottom of your screen, which allows you to listen exclusively in either French or English, or listen to the original language on the floor. The comments are through the chair. In accordance with the motion, we have made sure we've done the connection tests in advance. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082, at this subcommittee, we are going to be studying the human rights situation in Nigeria. It's my pleasure to welcome two witnesses. First off, from Jubilee Campaign, Hulda Fahmi, Communications Associate, and from Lawyers Without Borders France, Angela Ozoma Ewuchaku. You're the head of office in Nigeria. You'll each given 5 minutes. It's helpful if you time yourselves, but I'll also be timing you. And at the 5-minute mark, I'll lean in and ask you to conclude. And then we'll enter into a series of rounds where members will be able to ask you questions and you can continue elaborating on whatever point you want to elaborate on. So without further ado, if we can have Ms. Fahmi please start us off for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the subcommittee for this opportunity and for your continued concern and attention to the dire human rights situation in Nigeria and its implications for the wider Sahel region in Africa. Jubilee Campaign works to promote the human rights and religious liberty of ethnic and faith minorities and the release of religious prisoners of conscience. And our remarks today will focus on that and human rights violations focused on freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief, and also how these violations are coupled with other violations such as the right to life and degrading and instances of torture. Since the turn of the millennium, Islamist jihadist militant group Boko Haram has been terrorizing the citizens of Nigeria, in particular Christians and non-jihadist peaceful Muslims throughout the northern and central Nigeria. In December 2015, following significant military operations, the president of Nigeria claimed that the initiative had technically defeated Boko Haram. However, in the 7 years since this declaration, militant violence has exponentially increased and new actors such as the Islamic State West Africa Province, ISWAP, and bands of Islamist Fulani militants have taken on roles in the violence. And this was flagged in the last meeting you held in November 2020. This has included executions and inhuman and degrading treatment of civilians, including the cutting of limbs, the burning of homes and places of worship, kidnapping and enslavement of women and girls, and coerced conversions. Leah Sharibu is one notable case. The UNHCR has recorded, as of November 2021, of at least 3 million internally displaced Nigerians, with the majority being displaced in the northeast of Nigeria and the country's middle belt, areas where Fulani Islamist violence and other criminal gang attacks are concentrated. And UNICEF also reports that over 1 million children are afraid of returning to school due to the violence and kidnapping by these criminal gangs. In 2020, Jubilee Campaign submitted a report to the International Criminal Court titled, "This Genocide is Loading." I recommend you review it. And we argued that the jihadist Fulani militants had increasingly engaged in crimes against humanity and genocidal attacks in the middle belt of Nigeria. Recent statistics now in January 2023 by Open Doors reported that 5,014 Christians were killed by Islamists and other militant groups, and they account for nearly 90% of the total number of Christians killed worldwide. And only just this week, on Wednesday, there was a new attack by Fulani militants that killed 18 people and wounded others in a predominantly Christian village in the Plateau state of Nigeria. And crimes against humanity are comprised of any one of the following acts when committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population. And it includes a murder, extermination, deportation or forcible transfer of population, torture, rape, persecution against a group on political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, religious, gender, or other grounds, enforced disappearance of persons, and other acts intentionally causing great suffering or serious injury to body or to mental or physical health. Acts of genocide similarly include the killing of members of a group, the infliction of harm, and additionally imposing conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And the commission of any one of these acts constitutes a crime against humanity. And throughout what we've seen in Nigeria, every one of these acts has been committed. And so in our recommendations, we urge, and as a follow-up also from the last meeting, that a observation mission be sent to Nigeria to collect evidence of what is going on, and specifically to, sorry, there was a sound here, to work on collecting what the crimes that have been committed, and as the International Criminal Court does not cover the crimes perpetrated by the Fulani militant gangs and other criminal gangs, such as the enslavement and coerced conversion of women and girls. So there needs to be an additional, either commission of inquiry or an observation mission. And then second, to work on the removal of anti-blasphemy laws, which in 12 northern Nigerian states has the death penalty. And we have the case of Yahya Sharif Aminu, who was sentenced to death. Now that case is being challenged in the Supreme Court with the validity of applying Sharia laws which include the death penalty for blasphemy. And then we also have several notable cases that of Rhoda Jatau, and Mubarak Bala.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
hitting 5 minutes, so if there's a concluding remark you want to make, we can continue afterwards to your testimony, but thank you for that, Ms. Fahmi. We're going to continue on to Madame Uzma pendant 5 minutes. For 5 minutes.
5 minutes. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to also thank all other committee members. I am the head of Office of Avocats Sans Frontières France, Lawyers Without Borders France, working in Nigeria for close to 2 decades now to promote issues of human rights, particularly around issues of torture, extrajudicial killings, arbitrary detention, and the death penalty. My presentation today will focus on these issues, at least 2 of them, torture and the death penalty, especially as perpetrated by state actors. In the course of the work that we have been doing in Nigeria, it is important to establish that human rights violations in Nigeria go way beyond the issues that I'm going to focus on. But because of time, I would not dwell into that. But the speech that I sent in, a link is put in there for an elaborate report by Amnesty International and the US Department of State reports. And speaking directly on the issue of torture, torture is commonly used by security agencies in Nigeria, not just the police, but also other security agencies, particularly for interrogation. And this is known to be one of the highest. Links to death in custody, and it is one of the issues that led to the NSAS protests in 2020. In 2020, October 2020, you had youth from Nigeria who took to the streets to protest against police brutality, extortions, and basically demanding for reform, respect for human rights. And we know that in the course of the work that we're doing, supporting victims of torture, that between 2020, when those protests held, And now little or nothing has changed with regards to the use of torture by security agencies. This is particularly important because it cuts across various groups and targets particularly young men across different societies. Of course, we know that Nigeria has a teeming young population, but this is also leading to severe cases of extrajudicial killings and forced disappearance by the police, but also by the DSS, which is the secret police that we have in the country. Between 2010 and date, Avocat Sans Frontières France has represented over 1,000 victims of torture in the country. And just to move on very quickly also to mention that the death penalty is still very commonly used in Nigeria. We have over 3,000 persons who are on death row in the country. And this accounts for the highest number of persons on death row in the continent. There is no official moratorium on the death penalty currently. And the risk that Nigerians on death row run is that the executions can occur at any time. It's just a signatory way. Fahim talked about the case of Yahaya Aminu Sharif. This is one of the recent cases of instances where the death penalty has been handed down for blasphemy. But it's not just restricted to blasphemy. It is for other crimes under the Sharia law, such as rape, adultery, but also under the common law for issues of armed robbery, murder, and so on. It is very worrisome because over 3,000 persons are at risk of imminent execution. And very closely related to that is the issue of extrajudicial killings. We have a movement in the southeast of the country that is called the IPOB, the separatists for the agitation of Biafra. And we have massive cases of extrajudicial killings going on, unchecked, undocumented, and unreported. The latest reports that Amnesty International issued gives the figure at 122. However, this is way beyond. In terms of recommendations, one of the key things that we're calling for is accountability. Accountability for issues of torture, and this can be achieved by improvement of internal and external oversight mechanisms within, for example, the Nigerian police force itself, but also external oversight by civil society and Police Service Commission. And in terms of for the death penalty, we have just one recommendation. We'll be asking for a moratorium on the death penalty, an official moratorium on the death penalty. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we'll go on to our first round of 7 minutes to Mr. Van Popta, please.
Good. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here with us today and sharing your insights. It's indeed tragic what we hear happening in Nigeria. We hear in the West, we hear stories concerning Boko Haram kidnapping schoolgirls. Could you, maybe we'll go with Ms. Fahmy, if you could just give us some insights as to what is the status of young girls that were kidnapped some years ago. And also, I read a story about Leah Sharabu, a Christian schoolgirl abducted along with some of her school classmates. If you're familiar with that, could you give us an update? Ms. Fahmy.
Thank you. Sorry, I had some issues on muting. Yeah, so Leah Sharbu is still in captivity, and she enslaved by Boko Haram, actually now ISWAP, and she has given birth to 2 children. And someone who had recently met her, she's alive, but still enslaved. And that was the latest update. And actually on May 20th, she'll be turning 20 years old. And it's concerning because it seems that they know where she is, but the Nigerian government haven't been able to release her. And then regarding the Chibok girls, She was one of them. She has still not been released. And then, sorry, I need to get the other numbers. Out of the 117, there were 2 that were executed at the time, and then there's still Venta. Sorry. The other Venta. Sorry, yeah. I'll get back to the numbers regarding the Chibok girls, but what we had a Commission on the Status of Women side event, parallel event, is that we see also, while these are the known cases, there's still ongoing cases in the Middle Belt, and that these cases are not as reported on. I'm sorry, jag håller på att.
This is fine. Okay, good. Thank you. I mean, that's
Yeah,
very,
thank you.
very useful information. So thank you so much for that and for the work that you do. I'll go to Angela. To what extent can organizations like yours rely on the civil government in Nigeria to come to the support and aid of the work that you're doing with victims of crime?
So there was a bit of an echo. Okay. In terms of support to the work that we're doing, we first of all, we represent victims of torture, persons who've been arbitrarily detained, and also those facing the death penalty. And one of the core kinds of support that we could receive would be in different phases. First of all, we require sometimes political support for the kind of work that we do, especially on advocacy against the death penalty, because it's a highly sensitive issue. And on the other hand, we provide direct legal assistance to victims. And this is one area that we could also be supported, because here we have most of the clients that we represent are persons without means who cannot afford the services of a lawyer. And the Legal Aid Council in Nigeria is under-resourced, understaffed. So most victims rely on organizations like us. There are some others as well to provide this sort of support in terms of legal remedy. So the kind of support we would require could be direct support to, first of all, have an enabling environment to be able to exist and do the work that we do, but then also, of course, financial support for direct legal assistance to victims. And on the other hand,
no, good. Thank you for that. So, now, would it be accurate to say that the victims of crime that you're working with to defend and to aid are victims of state-sanctioned torture, or are we dealing with primarily with rebel groups?
So my organization focuses on representing victims of state-sanctioned torture, because we work in accordance with the definition of torture as given under the UN Convention Against Torture in Article 1, which talks about activities by state security agencies or with the acquiescence and knowledge of the state.
Okay, good. Thank you. I see Ms. Fahmy is back. I believe I saw her. Is she back? I'll put the question. Oh, yeah, there you are. Okay, good. Thank you very much. So
Sorry.
you talked about acts of genocide. Is this, just clarify for me, is this genocide against racial groups or against religious groups?
I would say it's both, because ethnic and religious often there's ethnic groups within Nigeria as well, but we're mainly on religious grounds. But of course, you have, I mean, for example, you have Fulani Christians, and they are also targeted. So it's not only ethnic. And then it's not only us who is saying this. Genocide Watch also issued a warning regarding that there are genocidal acts in the region. So that's why we're calling for an investigation, because civil society should not bear the brunt of investigating what's happening in the Middle Belt and northern Nigeria.
Good. Thank you very much. I believe my time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Van Popta. We'll now move to our next questioner, Ms. Vanderbilt. Please, for 7 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, but thank you particularly to our witnesses for your testimony about what's happening in Nigeria. I'm noting that the perpetrators of a lot of these human rights abuses that you're outlining are different groups. So you have what we've heard about Boko Haram, and you mentioned other jihadist militias. You mentioned the police and things that the police are doing. The state, in terms of the blasphemy laws, the death penalty, torture in custody by police, and you mentioned secret police. So my question is, if we're looking at what we can do in terms of recommendations, to what extent can the state in Nigeria, does it have the capacity to actually prevent these human rights abuses that are happening by the other actors? And to what extent is it being directed by the state institutions themselves? And how much willingness is there for the state to be able to, because I know some of this is regional as well, whether or not there is even a capacity of the Nigerian government to be able to maintain law and order and justice in some of the parts of the country? I know it's a long question, but I'd like both of you to answer, please. We'll start with Ms. Bami.
Yeah, so I think it has to do with priorities of the government. The UN special rapporteurs had noted that the Nigerian government had gone into Kenya to take one of the IPOB leaders and bring him into Nigeria. But at the same time, they haven't taken those efforts to retrieve Leah Sharibu. They haven't taken steps to protect Deborah in the university, to bring in the military to protect her when it was going on. There were witnesses who said that the police were just staying outside and didn't intervene. So that is very concerning. And then like what we mentioned with the blasphemy laws sanctioning the death penalty for blasphemy, in a state like that, do you think there is an interest to protect individuals for their freedom, who are being targeted for their freedom of expression? So that these are issues within the legal framework that give the justification. And then the ICC investigation was opened in 2010. It was a long time ago, and we've always been giving Nigeria the benefit of the doubt, but it's been there still hasn't been anyone. There still hasn't been any concrete actions. And then with regards to Deborah Yakubu, nobody has been arrested. So these are concerning signs.
A lack of political will there. Angela, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, thank you for that very important question. So I would say that Nigerian government does have the capacity. It's a question of lack of political will, as you correctly put. For example, Nigeria has a responsibility to protect citizens from attacks, and it does have the means. So we know that the government will always side. Yes, we know, for example, in the Northeast, you're dealing with insurgency, banditry in the Northwest, in the Southeast, you have the separatists. However, the government can show that it can be a bit more decisive in taking concrete actions against the perpetrators. It's not doing this, whether it is being perpetrated by state actors on its own side, it is not taking any action. We have legal frameworks, for example, the Anti-Torture Act. No police officer has ever, or any other security agent has ever been prosecuted under the Anti-Torture Act. So it's a lack of will.
Thank you. And to what extent is this gendered? I heard you talk about death penalty for blasphemy, for adultery, the lack of will to protect women, or when women are the ones that are the victims. To what extent is there a systemic discrimination against women? We'll do the same order.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, it's with regards to women, again, it, like she said, there's death penalty for adultery, so that does make it difficult. With the abduction and forced marriage of women and girls, what made it difficult in the northern states is that there's also the element of coerced conversion, and this has meant that it's harder to retrieve the girls because the family, let's say, is Christian, and then they don't have access to the judicial courts to get their daughter back, because you have to be Muslim to be able to appeal to the Islamic courts, which is why it's very important to also have, contacts with progressive Muslims or Muslims who are against these laws. So it adds a double vulnerability in getting justice. And then so that's one aspect, and then so I would say that's an issue. And then of course that the laws are also that they're targeting schools where girls go to. I mean, schooling is, and this is actually affecting generations of girls and their right to work. And it creates problems going forward, which is why it has to be addressed and why we have to try and investigate. I think that's the key thing, like Mrs. Angela said, is accountability, and that's not what we haven't seen that.
For Angela?
Okay, yes. The issue of how the death penalty affects women, there's an interesting report on that by the Cornell University in New York. I contributed to part of that report, at least for the research that was done on the Nigerian part. And it is interesting to note that there is a link, at least from my perspective, between issues, for example, regarding early forced marriage and the death penalty. We have a lot of young girls who were forced to get married. A particular case that my organization handled at the regional level, Maimuna Abdulmumini, she was alleged to have killed her husband at the age of 13. And that's not the only case. It's not in isolation. You have several cases like that, forced into marriage, abused, and when they take action, the legal system does not take into consideration the abuse and hands down the death penalty. So you have mixed issues, being a woman, abused, a survivor, but also a minor on the death row. But happily, we're able to get her off death row because we won the case. But several other cases like that are ongoing in the North.
Thank you. And that concludes this round. We'll continue on, though, avec Monsieur Brunel de Sepp.
Mr. Brunel de Sepp, you have 7 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our experts and witnesses today who are helping us to reflect on what is happening in Nigeria. The committee has to act on what we're hearing today. One of the questions I ask myself when I listen to you and listen to questions from my colleagues, very often in situations where women are particularly targeted, there's also the LGBTQ community that is targeted. Do you have any reports telling us whether this community is also targeted? Do you know that? Do you know whether they are facing terrible dangers on the Nigerian territory? Any of the two witnesses can answer that question.
Okay. Is it okay if I
Oui, allez-y.
Okay. So, regards to the LGBTQ community in Nigeria, first of all, in terms of legal framework, there is the Same-Sex Prohibition Act, which has criminalized that and particularly targeting the entire community. And in terms of action related to the discussion on the death penalty, you have 4 persons who were arrested in Bauchi and tried because of for being gay, they're actually men, and sentenced to death. So that's just one of the kinds of attacks that the community has been facing in the country. But of course, I'm sure Fami may want to add to that.
So actually, Jubilee campaign hasn't documented on LGBTQ, but I would say that it's very similar to what ex-Muslims face. And there's a similar taboo again around being ex-Muslim, like Mubarak Balo got 24 years in prison. So I would say very similar and concerning, especially in the northern states.
Merci.
Thank you. We've also noted that there's an increase in food insecurity and poverty in Nigeria right now. Is violence causing food insecurity, and food insecurity is leading to a situation where people are ready to do whatever to feed their families? Is that the situation, or do we still have an opportunity to address food insecurity now in Nigeria? Ms. Fami.
Merci. So
Thank you.
Is that the people who are being targeted are farmers. Many of them are farmers. So that means that the crops for the next season is going to be lacking. So that's one of the issues causing food security, and then insecurity. Then the second is that there's 3 million people internally displaced. So they're not harvesting their own food. They're dependent on receiving food. So that is one of the also pressure points. And also the it's also difficult for them then to have access to food. So I'd say those are the violence is creating problems in getting food, in receiving food, and then also more people are dependent on just receiving, and they're not able to cultivate or produce their own crops.
Et ces personnes qui sont déplacées.
And these displaced people, are they more targeted by violence? Because there are lots of ethnic groups, and there's a power struggle in many provinces between various ethnic groups, and there are population displacements. The people being forced to move, are they more likely to be victims of violence?
I think you answered I definitely, it's I think it's been seen in all situations when there's internally displaced that they don't have a home. They're also coming into a population, into other communities, which also can cause a little bit of, they have a community that's already vulnerable, like is probably struggling because they don't have the means, and then they have to receive all these IDPs, and many of them, sometimes they're in camps, but many times also just in the communities. So yes, they're vulnerable to violence, and also this is also where the trafficking and the risk for trafficking and vulnerabilities of girls occurs. So you're just again mentioning all the chain, what can happen with like the long, yeah. You've just highlighted a very important issue. And it has been, I think Stephanos Foundation just released a report that actually goes through all the different challenges that the IDPs face. And it's limited because it's often the civil society who's providing the aid for these individuals. And we know that in one state, the local governor was telling IDPs to disperse and not to congregate together because they want to kind of deny that there's even IDPs in the area.
Merci pour toutes ces questions.
Thank you. All these questions and answers are very important for our analysts who are taking down, who are writing reports. There was an election recently. What do you think of those elections? Because what we saw was that there was about 27% of people who voted. Were these elections democratically conducted, and considering what happened in February, was there a positive outcome? What do you think about that?
Allez-y.
Go ahead.
So yes, in February 2020, general elections held in the country. But to give you feedback on what the general perception is, first on the part of civil society and the general populace. So there is a great disenchantment. People believe that the elections were not transparent and were not free and fair. And this is because in the months and weeks leading up to the elections, the body that is in charge of conducting elections, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, had deployed a technological intervention that's, had massive communication campaigns assuring Nigerians and, civil society that now elections will be transparent because we use what we call beavers that would enable electronic identification and registration, but also direct transmission of election results from the polling units straight to a server that could be viewed publicly. This did not happen, at least for the presidential, and this has created great distrust amongst every cadre of the society, of course, except those who won.
Est-ce que c'est la même chose pour les élections?
Was it the same for? I was going to ask a question about the mid-March governor's elections, but since my time is up, the witnesses could wait for the next round. We'll continue with Mr. Angus.
Welcome to the committee.
Thank you so much, Chair. The testimony we've heard today has been very concerning, and the situation that we're looking at is certainly very concerning. Mrs. Zuma, I'd like to start with you. We look at the story of what happened with the kidnapping of the 276 girls from Boko Haram shocked the world. We would think, and I think we would all agree, that the protection of children, the protection of girls, is the most fundamental obligation of family, community, nation. And yet this kidnapping, this violence against these girls is almost without precedent for us to have learned of it. I'd like to ask you why you think this kind of targeting of young girls is happening, the kind of trauma support that is there for the survivors, and what is the situation now with the Nigerian government committing to protect the right of girls to education?
So yes, indeed, the kidnapping of the Chibok girls shocked the world, and unfortunately, many of them are still in captivity till today. And other kidnappings have occurred, majorly targeting West School, where girls are being educated. So this has created setback for the statistics of the girl child who would access education, particularly in the North. And this creates other chains, of course, of vulnerabilities affecting their future. And as Fami mentioned, it's going to go generations, because it took generations to be able to get the girl child to be able to have some level of education in Nigeria. The government is not doing enough. It's not doing enough to reassure parents that they can send their girls to school, and it's not doing enough to protect the children that are in school or those that are traveling to school. And this is one key area that the government has failed the people, the government has failed the children, and particularly girls. And it should be a priority for the nation, for the government, but for the entire society. We have very weak security structures around schools because obviously schools are being targeted. But the fact that it happened the first time, the second time, the third time shows that the government clearly has failed in this regard.
I think what's concerning to me is we're not dealing here with Nigeria being a failed state. we see their use of enormous levels of state power and violence. And for example, you talked about how many people are on death row. So that it shows that there are priorities in terms of where the state is applying its security measures. What does it say to the families of the children who've been kidnapped? What does it say to society in general that the priority is not the protection of these young girls and their right to education?
So with regards to priorities have always been misplaced in my point of view when it comes to budgeting, and this is why we continue to have scenarios like this in the country. And for example, the issue of torture that I spoke about leading to extrajudicial killings and the high number of individuals on death row, it clearly shows that they would rather resort to torture than equip the police to be able to have tools to be able to do their work. And you have on the other side, the police arguing that they don't have equipment, they have very poor budgets, and including the military who are on the front lines. They are supposed to, for example, protect the girls from such abductions, have come up to say they are not well equipped, they are not, they don't have the right tools. So yes, it's a problem of priority, and the government needs to redirect its priority to ensure that vulnerable groups, especially children, are protected, and we have a security, particularly the police, that is well equipped and able to carry out its work of protection in the society.
Thank you. Ms. Fahmy, I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned the issue of trafficking, and we know that in destabilized situations, issues where there's levels of violence in gangs, once again, young women, girls are targeted. Last year, I was part of the parliamentary investigation into MindGeek, the giant international porn company, and I was contacted by a number of feminists from the global south who wanted to focus on how places like Nigeria and other countries are being used as much larger trafficking rings. Has your organization looked into this? And what is the situation for human trafficking and the targeting and exploitation of young women and girls?
Thank you. Yeah, Jubilee Campaign released a report on, actually with the UN Special Rapporteur on sale and on slavery. And there was a report on the role of criminal gangs in slavery. So I would refer to that because I don't have the details with me, and my colleague will be able to explain it much better. But yeah, sorry, your question was whether.
Well, what is the picture? You're referring to slavery. I'd asked about human trafficking. Is that what we're looking at? The enslavement, abuse, physical violence, sexual violence, and trafficking of young girls in destabilized areas, either by gangs or by terrorist groups.
Yeah, we are seeing that, and also during COVID, it increased, of course, with the role of digital. Sorry, but I would say during COVID, we also saw an increase because of this lack of documentation, and also because of the increase in web pornography. So there was a greater so
you saw a direct correlation between the isolation of people, online pornography, and the abuse of young girls and women in the context of Nigeria. You saw that connection.
There were some trends of that, but I can't speak specific to that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. And now we're going to continue on to a series of 5-minute rounds, starting with Mr. Assassi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you also. Oh,
He's just plugging in his headset, as we need to do for our interpreters.
Apologies for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you also to our witnesses. I have to say, after having listened to you and having read on the situation, in Nigeria. It's pretty obvious that it's a very bleak situation. There is a crisis of legitimacy insofar as the government is concerned. There are various militia groups throughout the country. There's food insecurity. There's displacement of individuals. There is refugee flow. So for us, our mandate is to come up with recommendations as opposed to just focus on all the challenges that do currently exist. I understand from listening to Angela that your recommendation was the need for accountability and oversight. And I can only presume that that would only deal with organs of the state, and that would not cover militia groups throughout the countries. However, that being said, insofar as accountability is concerned, is there a model, a specific model that you have in mind, and a model that has been used in other countries and in other similar contexts as well?
Right. So regards to accountability, the model that I would recommend is one, having a robust internal accountability mechanism. This is important because it's going to help to build trust in the system, transparency, a system that if a mechanism that is able to provide feedback and communicate to not just those who are going to engage with it, but also the society at large.
No, but my question is, I completely appreciate and agree with your recommendation, the need for accountability. But what organ do you want to see actually implement this accountability? Is it international institutions, in your opinion, who should do it? And are there other models that have been attempted in other countries that you think would be useful in this particular context?
So there can be multiple layers. First, there needs to be an independent mechanism at the national level that is able to carry this out before, and you could also have at the international level. But first, there needs to be in-country and independent mechanism that is able to carry out this oversight. And that would be my primary recommendation, yes.
Now, if I could go to Ms. Fahmy, you were talking about the need for fact-finding, for investigations. Completely agree with you there, especially given the fact that that would not only entail keeping an eye on developments as to what the government is doing or not doing, but also it would look into what various militias are doing throughout the country as well. So, so far, given that there have been special rapporteurs, UN rapporteurs, has Nigeria allowed them access to the country, and have they been allowed to actually do their job thoroughly?
So if I remember correctly, the special rapporteur on extrajudicial executions was one of the most recent visits, and that was in 2019. And she did a very thorough investigation, and she put out a warning that and that was mentioned in the last hearing as well, that if nothing is done, things will get much worse. The problem is that Nigeria maybe allows them to come into the country, but then they completely disregard and actually also call those investigations false and faulty. And so they actually said that what she said has no value at all, and then just condemned it. And they've done that with several other reports. The UK All Parliamentary Group on Freedom of Religion or Belief released a report, Genocide Unfolding in Nigeria. Similarly, the press secretary released a statement on that. So they're more pushing, and then it stays at that, and then there's no investigation, which is concerning, because what you want is action after that, not just a statement that avoids it.
Well, given all those impediments that Nigeria is putting in their way, is there another type of investigative mechanism that, in your opinion, could do a more thorough job?
So what we've mentioned is, commission of inquiry similar to what you have in South Sudan. You need people on the ground to investigate, and also you need protection for the ones who are doing the investigating. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll continue to our next round with Mr. Verson for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today as well. Just wanted to, the last witness that was speaking there is just around the claims of genocide. Has this been recognized by any governments anywhere in the world, other governments?
That is a good question. And there are states who have put up the warning sign. Hungary has given a lot of aid to affected communities. So they have noted this, and I know Hungary within the EU doesn't have the best reputation, but with regards to individuals who are affected by violence, they have been very clear there. And then, of course, this is not a state, but the Sovereign Order of Malta also sponsored an event regarding the sale and exploitation of women and girls in Nigeria. So those are the two countries that come to mind. I think there's probably additional countries, but what we've seen in Genocide Watch also released a report is that they're not recognizing, yes, Boko Haram, but not the increasing use of other militant groups and the violence that they're perpetrating. And this is concerning, that they're not, they're taking the Nigerian government stance on these issues. Can't hear you for some reason.
I'm just wondering, to either witnesses, what is the interplay China, Russia, and Nigeria? Do you have any comments on, are they an influence in this persecution that's happening in the region? Ms. Fahmy?
So I can't speak super clearly on this. This would just be speculation. But I mean, you do have, where there's a void in engagement by the international community, other groups come in, and there have been reports of, for example, Wagner Group sponsoring some of the militant groups. We do know that there were weapons that were dropped, but this was regarding Turkey, that were brought to militant groups within Nigeria. But that's, I can't speak on Nigeria. We'd have to, I'm not the right person. So.
Okay. Yeah, Angela, you got any comments on that?
Well, apart from what Fahmy has mentioned, there's also, again, these are just speculations with regards to economic interests that are sort of foiling banditry in the Northwest. And well, it's not very clear at what level the Chinese is involved. But we're not sure whether it's the government, but of course there are some activities, illegal mining activities that are foiling banditry, and also reports of sponsoring some of the armed groups in the Northwest particularly.
Okay. Ms. Fahmy, you mentioned the Wagner Group. Where should we look, or who should we look to get a little more intel on their activities in the region?
There are a lot of independent individuals who are looking at that, the connections. There's investigative journalists. I know there's a roundtable here in DC. Africa Working Group Chair Scott Morgan works on these issues, and there's additional Militant Wire reports on this as well. So I would recommend reaching out to them.
Okay. If you had to recommend Canada's engagement on this issue, is there one thing that Canada can do that you would recommend that we attempt? Top priority for you, Ms. Fahmy?
So the initial was to introduce a commission of inquiry for Nigeria through the UN mechanism. That would be, and you have all the examples of the Nigeria not responding to UN communications on multiple issues. So I would say that's one place Canada can step in as a valued voice in the international space.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Verson. And we'll continue on now for 5 minutes. Pour 5 minutes, Mr. Brunel Duceppe.
Mr. Brunel Duceppe, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We talked about mining. You know that Canada is probably one of the countries with the most mines because of Canadian laws. Does this not place Canada in a situation of flagrant contradiction? Maybe it's allowing mining extraction in Nigeria in violation of laws. Is there any action that Canada can take, for example, reasonable diligence? Angela Ofami, is there something that Canada can do to change the situation on the ground?
Allez-y, Madame Fami.
Ms. Fami.
Angela can. I would just agree. Yes, they should do something. Due diligence, know who the actors are, and sanctions on the individuals who. Well, also looking at where are they? Are they in conflict areas? Because oftentimes that is the case. There was an event actually on the Africa Leadership Summit saying that in the mining areas, there's violence used to displace the populations. So there does need to be due diligence. I'll give it to Angela because I'm.
Non? Oui.
Okay. Yes. That is a very sensitive issue. One of the first things could be to push for transparency around the issue of mining, because of course the mining in this context is illegal mining. So there needs to be transparency. There also needs to be due diligence as to. I mean, there are lots of speculations as to, who's giving the rights to enter, rights of entry to these companies, and there are lots of interests involved. So it's really due diligence, but also transparency. Transparency is important. The government is going on, and it's particularly in the crisis areas, in the conflict areas, and the government is not speaking up, and also the media, it's been stifled not to communicate so much on those issues. So a lot of transparency is required.
Merci. Vous avez parlé.
Thank you. Ms. Fami, you talked about the importance of an observation mission on the territory, which should be led by the United Nations. So we would like to see Canada taking a leadership position with the United Nations to organize such a mission. But when Canada is not taking action to prevent Canadian companies from violating laws, as we've seen in the last budget, Canada has just cut $1.3 million from humanitarian aid to international development. Do you think that with Canada's reputation, we are able to take this leadership role on the international scene? And on the same issue, how does the population see Canada in Nigeria? Is Canada's reputation still good enough to be able to organize such a mission?
So I'll give the last question to Angela because she's sitting in Nigeria. I think she has a better idea about that. But I would say I always, it's the actions. You have to judge people on their actions, and it's never too late to start good actions. So otherwise, what's the point in living, right? If we can't start afresh and to work. If we know, once we know, we are responsible to act. And now all of you parliamentarians, we now have heard what's going on in Nigeria. We know it, you know it, and now it's a responsibility to take this further. So it doesn't matter if it's today. I mean, now you know. So now you can go ahead.
In 30 seconds.
Okay, so in terms of how Nigerians view Canada and whether it can act, yes, I would say it can act. And of course, you have the political side who would always have a negative view, but in terms of you would have the support of the people on whose behalf you're going to. So do it in the interest of justice act. Yes.
Merci, thank you.
Fantastique. Merci beaucoup pour vos réponses.
Thank you for your answers.
On va continuer avec Monsieur.
We'll continue with Mr. Angus for 5 minutes.
Thank you. My colleague had asked about mining interests. I'm interested in the issue of oil because Nigeria is a very large petroleum state, and there's been many allegations over the years about environmental abuse, dislocation of peoples. There was a report done in the last decade on Royal Dutch Shell, arming gangs in Nigeria, targeting, torturing, killing people living in the creeks and swamplands of the Niger Delta, and paying, in one report, over $159,000 to a group that was linked to militia violence. So we've been talking about the religious fundamentalists, the terror gangs, criminal gangs targeting the people. Ms. Azuma, what about the allegations that companies who are benefiting from the massive oil wealth are engaged in targeting and human rights abuses?
So yes, it's true that a lot of focus has been on the northeast and northwest because of Boko Haram, but the environmental violations, environmental rights violations by the big oil companies continue to go on in particularly the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. And you have entire communities that are still dealing with issues of oil spillage, and the companies are not taking responsibility. And there's also been less and less media reports about the activities of the armed groups who are working in the creeks. And sometimes the companies try to project it as arming the groups to protect their facilities. And you also have the Nigerian government also adopting such approach by paying one of the notorious commanders in the creeks. And these are non-state actors to protect the oil facilities. So it's a bit of a strategy that has created a problem, because if the government can do it, then the companies will argue why they also cannot adopt the same strategy. But of course, these are issues that are affecting those in the communities and affecting livelihoods. And it is going on. It's been downplayed because of the various issues of Boko Haram in the north, but it's still going on in the Niger Delta. It's still a very big issue that needs attention.
So you're saying that these aren't historical allegations, this is what is going on today, and that the hiring of so-called security to defend facilities are these armed gangs? If that's the case, are they defending the facilities, or are they being used as the front lines to push people off their lands and to cover up, to silence people who are dealing with the environmental devastation of the oil production?
So I would say both, because you have organizations on the ground who are covering these issues, and there are lots of efforts that are being made to silence the people and push them off their properties because of oil, the oil is being, they're carrying out tests and trying to pass their pipes. So it is ongoing. It's true that it's been long. The only difference is that now there's a lot more awareness. A lot of civil society organizations are creating awareness among the people. So there's also sort of a coordinated effort to get the people's voice, unlike what you had, for example, last decade or 2 decades ago. And now we also have judgments at the ECOWAS court at the regional level against some of the big companies, for example, Shell, mandating them to clean up, but not necessarily addressing the issue of attacks, physical and violent attacks against the people and against communities. So this is another area that a lot of focus needs to be put on. But yes, it's ongoing, it's current.
Thank you very much for that. I guess I would ask in my closing time, we are seeing right now around the world as a result of the war in Ukraine, huge levels of inflation, growing insecurity, food insecurity, and yet it's compounded in Nigeria with attacks on farmers, communities, the violence. And there's real questions that have been raised that we've heard about issues of basic things like malnutrition. So you have an opportunity here to tell legislators in Canada what role we can play. What do you think Canada can do in a practical way to help people to try and stabilize the situation, keep people safe at this time in Nigeria?
Just a brief response, please. But feel free to fully answer the question.
There needs to be an end to the violence, and the violence continues because they enjoy impunity. And so Nigeria has had a lot of time to work on this, but we've seen that they have been either unwilling or unable, and we've seen more largely unwilling. And so the key thing is holding Nigeria accountable, but actually investigating the crimes, holding perpetrators accountable, and yes, bringing an end to the violence. I think that really is the key. And Nigerians are smart enough to work out but and also the implementation of the laws that already exist in the country, the implementation of the good laws and the and the repeal of anti-blasphemy laws and similar.
Thank you. We'll continue on to the next round for 4 minutes with Liberal member Mr. McKinnon, please. 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing here today and giving us all of your good information. I have a bunch of questions here, but none of them seem to be substantial enough to match the testimony you've given. We see a great deal of violence, as you say, continuing in a context of deep poverty, of malnutrition, of high inflation, and so forth. But it seems to be there's a fundamental breakdown of society that the civil authorities are not able to maintain order, and in fact, they seem to be part of the problem. They seem to be part of the violence. I think nothing says a breakdown of civil authority more clearly than extrajudicial executions. And while I support all of my colleagues' interest in help from the United Nations and other external resources, I think we've seen over the 20th century and even into the 21st century that solutions cannot be imposed from without. They have to have a competent, strong, and willing partner within the country. So I guess, do you see some aspect of the government that is strong enough to work with, that is strong enough to build out a more stable, peaceful society from? And I see that we have new elections, a new government coming into place. I'm wondering if you see hope there as a way forward to address these problems. And I'll throw it open to both witnesses to answer as you please. Please go ahead. Thank you.
I'll try and keep it brief so she has time because so I think one of the things that people have raised is, yes, I think being in touch with the governors who are actually working among the community who are affected, who come from displaced communities. Several governors have been trying to make changes. I think connecting with them is important. One of the recommendations people on the ground have made is to be able to police or to have local security or like local police for their area. And this has been is one key thing. Now, what we hear, like for example, the U.S. has given more military aid to Nigeria, but we've seen what the military has done. So giving more military aid is not going to solve the situation. And with regards to the new government, I have not heard much positive about that it's going to change. So that's the only thing that people are hopeful is that in the transition that there might be some release of religious prisoners of conscience. Angela.
Within 50 seconds.
Okay, yeah, so regards to accountability, again, I think there are some opportunities with the national prevention mechanism. They could play a real role if empowered and truly independent to be able to checkmate excesses by the police and security agencies with regards to torture, extrajudicial killings. And with regards to the new government, it is important to be hopeful that perhaps when the cabinet is inaugurated, would have credible persons who would be committed to pushing some change. But right now, the government, as you know, regards to the elections, does not give us that hope because there was a lot of violence sponsored by the government and the party that won the elections.
Great, thank you. I believe that is my time.
Yes.
Thank you both.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. McKinnon, today and filling in for one of our colleagues at the committee. And we're going to welcome Ms. Falk. Also, thank you for joining us and welcome to the committee. For 4 minutes, please.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Chair. And I just want to take a moment to thank the witnesses for being here today and commend each of them for the important work that they are doing and that their organizations are doing to protect and promote human rights in Nigeria. One of the questions that I have is I'm just wondering, and this is for both of the witnesses, if they could touch on if there are any specific challenges or obstacles that each of your organizations in particular face with the work that you are doing in Nigeria.
Feel free, please.
I think one of the main issues that we've faced is not enough attention to the situation, where we are receiving a lot of harrowing reports. And we are trying in different ways to get the message out. We have had several events on the Commission on the Status of Women, several events as parallel events. We've had UN Human Rights Council side events and tried to get states to sponsor it, to raise the issue. I think the issue is that we feel that that's where it ends. Even if special rapporteurs have also supported and spoken out. So I think the inaction on the government side has been the biggest challenge. And even Nigerians have come to the US to different hearings and shared about the situation, but still there's not been movement, political will, even outside of Nigeria to address.
Okay, so on our own part, key challenges Avocat Sans Frontières France is facing in the country will be in regards to, again, inaction on the part of the government, lack of response to advocacy to have, for example, the right policy, the right will to be able to implement legislations that ought to at least bring about change. There is also the ever-increasing, ever-changing context, regulatory framework for non-governmental organizations, particularly the international NGOs. That's also one key challenge that we are facing in terms of the work that we do. There is always a fear, of course, of reprisal, pushback by the government because of the sensitive issues that we're working on, torture, death penalty, extrajudicial killings. So these are some of the concerns and challenges that we experience.
Okay, thank you. And another question I have is, how are your organizations and I guess international organizations in general received by persecuted Nigerians? And is there, do the organizations find that there's a trust and openness to organizations like yourself or other international organizations?
Just a brief response.
Okay, so I would say that, again, it depends on what side. For the government, on one hand, yes, there's openness and willingness to partner with international organizations to bring about change, policy policy-wise, and the part of the society once there is openness, but at the same time, there's also a kind of doubts as to whether the international NGOs organizations are doing enough and not doing enough to push the government and hold the governments accountable.
Wonderful. Thank you both.
Merci, Madame Falk. On va continuer.
Thank you. We shall continue with Mr. Brunel Desep for 4 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We know that the Canadian government is able to institute sanctions. We saw this with other conflicts, like the conflict in Ukraine. And Canada introduced sanctions. Some may say they are not very effective. What action could the Canadian government take to punish all those violating human rights in Nigeria, those who are directly or indirectly benefiting from all these human rights violations? And it's up to any of you to answer the question.
I would say targeting the individuals who are, for example, now with or those who have not condemned the anti-blasphemy laws or who supported the murder of Deborah. I think that's also one way to sanction individuals who bring criminal cases again or call for the death of somebody for expression or exercising freedom of religion or belief. I think visa bans, similar sanctions like that to individuals so that they feel the pressure that they're putting on their own civilians.
Merci pour cette réponse. Plusieurs.
Thank you for that answer. Do you want to add something, Ms. Uzoma?
Yes, yes, I would like to add to that. And I'd like to say very quickly that Canada can perhaps put an open statement to support, for example, the use of universal jurisdiction against the particular individuals that are perpetrating torture, for example, in the country, since in country they're not being held accountable. But that is something that could put pressure on the government to know that Canada is, I mean, when Canada puts out that statement, other countries could also find ways to support such a stance.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We carry out various studies in this committee in various countries in the world on the human rights situation. What we've heard over the last few months and years, I don't know if you have noticed the same thing in Nigeria. The current conflict between Russia and Ukraine has downplayed other situations in the rest of the world. And there's a feeling that people are suffering. No one is saying that Ukraine should not be helped, but we are seeing lots of action and help being sent to Ukraine. Maybe there are other people saying, we also exist, but unfortunately, it looks like we are less important than the Ukrainians right now. Do you get that feeling, Ms. Fahmy?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the case. I think with Africa, it's similar with Sudan, that the attention was but I think also the need also for in southern Nigeria for the people to, they're also sometimes oblivious to what's going on in the north. So I think that's one area where civil society is trying to get engagement also within the country. But there is a lot of engagement now, greater engagement in diaspora, but also that's one. And I think one reason is also because those who do speak out face reprisals. And that makes it very difficult to get a loud voice from within Nigeria. But they are speaking out, and they're incredible lawyers and other lawyers who are really advocating for freedom. But yeah, I mean, you do see distract.
Merci. Thank you.
No, mais je vous remercie, mais
Thank you, witnesses. That was my last round. Thank you for coming to give us more information.
A questioner who is with us on screen, Mr. Angus, for 4 minutes.
Thank you. At the beginning of the meeting today, the Lawyers Without Borders talked about the number of people on death row facing execution. And I I'm trying to remember what the number was, but it seemed to be extraordinarily large. Can you break down for us to make sense of this application of state violence? Is it arbitrary detention, targeting of religious minorities, response to criminal gangs or terror threats, or just a general breakdown of peace and security that requires such massive levels of detention and the use of something as extreme as the death penalty? Can you just walk us through that?
Okay, the sad thing to note about the death penalty in Nigeria is that we have what we call the mandatory death penalty, and this means that for certain offenses, the court has no discretion. The judge cannot exercise any discretion, but must hand down the death penalty once there's a conviction. There's no room for allocutors to ask for a lighter sentence. So against this background, I would say that unfortunately, this is not applicable only to the most serious crimes. For example, genocide, or no, it is for offenses such as kidnapping, armed robbery, and adultery under the Sharia law. And these are blasphemy, and these are actually being handed down on a daily basis. So it's not as though it is targeting just any particular group. It's across the country. It is used widely because it's hinged on the Constitution. So sadly, this is the background. And that's why you have the statistics is over 3,200 persons that are on death row, and the numbers are growing every day.
So adultery is sufficient for a judge to bring down the death penalty without any ability for him to mediate the sentence. That would suggest to me a legal system that is heavily stacked against the rights of women to be heard. Would that be fair to say?
I would just like to highlight that adultery in this context is only applicable under the Sharia law, which is applicable in the northern parts of the country. At least 19 states in the northern part of the country apply the Sharia law, and you have this. So of course, yes, it is heavily skewed against women because the case that brought Avocat Sans Frontières France to Nigeria is actually one of such cases of a woman who was sentenced to death by stoning for adultery. So yes, that's the reality.
And in Uganda, we've just heard the laws being changed to bring the death penalty against LGBTQ people. Is state violence or Sharia law being used to threaten death to people who were of a gay background?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, we have currently a case in Bauchi involving gay men who have been sentenced to death currently in Bauchi State. So it's also being used to target members of the LGBTQ community, particularly in the north again.
In the north,
under the Sharia law. Yeah.
Thank you. That ends my level of questioning. Thank you, Chair, for inviting me and letting me sit in on this committee.
Thank you for being here today. To all, Mr. Angus and everybody else, all the members. And I'd like to in particular thank the witnesses for your testimony, for being here, sharing your knowledge with all of us for the last hour and a half. Thank you, Hulda Fahmi, for being here from Jubilee Campaign, and also Angela Uzma Iwuchuka. I hope I got your name, family name well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Iwuchuka.
From Lawyers Without Borders France. Thank you to you both for sharing, and please continue your advocacy. It's very important for us. We are now going to go into in-camera session for the members, and we will continue on with committee business. So for those of you on Zoom, please do follow those links that were sent to you already. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maxine. Au revoir.